What are some of the worst things that you can do in business to keep someone from ever buying from you again? We're going to be talking about it today on the show, including a couple of very specific examples that have happened in the news just recently. Hey, I'm the host of the Good Advice Podcast. My name's Blake Benz, and we're talking about the practical, actionable things you need to know to be able to do business better. Now, before we dive into today's conversation, we got a lot of things to chat about. But before we get into it, a quick word from one of the amazing businesses that sponsors the podcast. Listen up. We'll be right back soon. Do you ever feel like your payment processor is robbing you blind? For some of us, it's not blind. We look at the amount of money that's going to our payment processor month after month, and a lot of times we ask ourselves, is there a better way? I'm making good money, yet so much of it isn't actually ending up in my pocket. In the world of payment processing, in many cases, it's a cashless world, so you have to have a payment processor you can really trust. I personally am a big fan of Brad Norwood, who's the owner of PrimePaymentsUSA.com. Brad's a business owner himself. He knows all the challenges that come with running a business. More importantly, he knows the value of an individual customer. See, some of these bigger businesses, they're all about scale. They're all about bringing in as many customers as possible. But do they know your name? Do they know your business? Do they know what's important to you? In many cases, the answer is no. And in worst cases, they're just looking to get as much money from every transaction that you work hard for, which really doesn't feel too good. So you got to reach out to Brad Norwood today and understand how he's doing business and why it can save you money month after month. More importantly, you might even ask him about his zero-fee payment processing that he's offering to a select few of people. Go to PrimePaymentsUSA.com and start putting the money that you worked hard for back into your pocket. All right, so I don't even know how this is a real story, but this happened this week. And the crazy thing, what's the expression, by the way, like things always happening in threes? Well, we don't have three examples. We have two examples of probably one of the first times I've ever seen something like this happen. And it just goes to show how if you're running a small business and you're worried about competing with some of the larger brands, you're in luck. There's actually some possibilities for you to not just differentiate yourself, but to really deliver a quality product that your customers will appreciate. So, getting into the news, this past week, in fact, I think this was yesterday, an Uber ridee, a man and a woman, they were involved in a car accident. In fact, let me pull up the specifics here, just so that I can correctly describe it. So a couple was in a car accident with their Uber driver. And essentially, the accident was so traumatic physically that let me just find the exact details on here. They were riding an Uber vehicle in March 2022. The wife was in the critical care unit for a week with a spinal fracture and traumatic injuries to her abdominal wall. And then later on in the article, she talks about how she's in pain every day. So, you wonder what happens here. And Uber, by the way, there's been some back and forth in past years on, are Uber employees really employees? Are Uber drivers really actual, the contract employees, or rather independent contractors? And this, by the way, hasn't been anything new in the last decade around this whole gig economy and who exactly is working for whom. Well, a judge ruled that there is an agreement that this family made with Uber prior to this accident where they agreed that under no circumstances would they sue Uber. Now, is this in the terms of use to use Uber? No, in fact, this is because the week prior to the accident, their daughter, a 12-year-old girl, ordered Uber Eats. And whenever you use the Uber Eats app, you agree. There's a no a no there's an arbitration clause that basically says you will not sue the company if something happens. All that to say, and I apologize if I was like scattered. I'm just kind of looking at this news article to see if there's anything else that I'm missing here. So anyway, long story short, couple gets in a car crash. They want to sue Uber. The company comes back and says, well, you can't because you signed this document saying that you wouldn't sue us if something was to happen, even though that document was in our Uber Eats app. On a related story, a few weeks ago, Disney was in the mainstream news because a woman had allegedly had an allergic reaction at a Disney restaurant, died, and then the family tried to sue Disney because this woman had asked specifically, hey, I have an allergy, just making sure that my food doesn't have that. And they're like, no, you're fine, you're fine. Turned out it was contaminated and she had an allergic reaction and unfortunately passed away. Well, Disney came back to that family and said, sorry, you can't sue us because on your Disney Plus app, which wasn't even an active account, your Disney Plus app that you signed up for years ago, there's also an arbitration clause in that as well that says, hey, you won't sue us for any reason, or you won't take us to a trial jury. So I read both these stories and it, on one end, it really upsets me. I think it upsets a lot of people. In fact, I think this is why it should be no surprise why both of these stories have been trending in the mainstream news and on social media, because you have two very large, very wealthy corporations who have essentially pointed to these somewhat lengthy, not always particularly followed terms of use documents as reasons for why there is no being made whole. There is no, this thing happened, but sorry, you're out of luck because you signed this thing. I have a real problem with this. Because on one end, or rather not on one end, in one way, it is everything wrong to me about how business is done today. Business is done in a very transactional way. It's done, swipe the card, move on to the next transaction. If you've listened to the podcast long term at all, you know that I've talked endlessly about the value of a repeat customer, the value about someone who buys from you again, the value of someone who has such a meaningful experience from you that not only are they willing to buy again, but they're also eager to tell other people to buy from you. By the way, word of mouth, power of referral is infinitely more valuable than simply paying for marketing, or rather paying for ads, getting someone to click through to your page and what have you. And yet we spend hundreds of thousands, millions, in fact, tens and tens of millions of dollars on digital advertising each and every day. So I've always been a fan of seeing a better way to do it and thinking about this in a way where you actually you develop a business you're proud of, but you have customers who have just a truly good experience with you. Now, at the end of the day, we're not talking about over dramatizing your business. If what you sell is hot dogs, I don't really know if a customer's life is going to, like, they were a drug addict and now they've sworn to be clean after eating the hot dog that you made. I don't know if it's like that. And I don't know if it's like, that movie Ratatouille where the food critic comes into the restaurant and eats the meal and has like this transformational experience where they think back to their childhood and it's just this incredibly meaningful moment. I don't know if your business product is ever going to create that for your customer. But what I will say is you also don't have to. You don't have to create an experience that transforms your customer. But on the same token, I feel personally, ethically, and morally that doing the right thing, doing what you said you would do means delivering a product that you can be proud of and that your customer can be really happy that they purchased it. There's so much junk and fluff out there that you don't always have to be the best in the game, but simply delivering something intentional can make a truly memorable experience for your customer. But let's get further into this conversation about these two corporations. I used the words ethical, and moral. I I don't think this is like even like a religious conversation. Like I'm a Christian, I believe in God. I'm sure a lot of my perspectives on things is based on my religious background, but I feel like one of the reasons why this is it's trending so much on social media is because outside of a religious lens, like there's something intrinsic to us that we look at that and we say that's wrong. Why should it be that a company where someone dies or gets maimed or significantly injured is able to point to something signed in one place and remove all responsibility in another place? It doesn't seem right to me. It doesn't seem ethical or moral. It doesn't seem like doing business with integrity. I've had some conversations like this in the past, and I've even seen some conversations like this happen on certain TV shows. TV shows I'm referring to, like conversations, business conversations on social media or on TV or what have you. And it's just a bit unsettling to me how people point to these instances as being very clever and very smart. I've told the story about in my early days of good advice. I had a marketer who talked about, he talked about all sorts of different things, but he talked about, going to a really expensive neighborhood and going to a house that's for sale and standing out on the front porch and acting like it's your home, or renting the biggest condo or the sky-rise condo in downtown Fayetteville and recording content from there and being like, hey, this is where I am. This is why, and just bending the rules enough. Like you don't say it's your house, but you say something like, hey, here I am at, the condo in Fayetteville, and man, I love this place, and implying enough that you own it while also removing the need to defend yourself so that if someone does accuse you, you can say, well, hey, I never said I owned it. You misunderstood. It's your fault, right? And I remember pushing on this and being like, I don't know about that. And I was very new to business. I was new to business and also like, is this how business is done? And I remember this person being like, yeah, it's smart business. You're naive if you're not playing the game. I think early on, I realized I could have made a lot more money. I could have made a lot more money if I hadn't done things the honest way or the ethical way. Sometimes it's not even about ethics or morality. It's just about, there's something in me that tells me when something is the right thing to do, even when it's not like a moral issue, if that makes sense. But I think it makes it too weighty to call it like listening to your conscience. There's just a way I've decided to do business that has been important to me. So my question to you then would be, how do you do business? Do you trick your customers? And I don't even really like that question because again, I don't think the majority of people do business in this way, but I do think some people do business in a way where they convince themselves that they're the ones who are right. They're the ones who, it's the customer's fault, right? Instead of realizing you have a junky product. Good example of this, I paid for something a few years ago. Paid for something and the product was not at all what it was marketed as. So I asked for a refund and the person said, well, and it was a couple grand. So it was it was important to me to get a refund. Well, the person who sold it to me said, "Well, and it was this marketing thing, or thing to get more brand awareness." And they said, "Well, why aren't you happy with it?" And I said, "Well, honestly, the way you described it, it's not at all what it is. Like you said, it was this thing to get me all these leads, all this stuff, all this attention, and that didn't happen. So I'm gonna ask for my money back." And by the way, you can tell how much more savvy I got in business because that first marketer where I spent 15K, he scared me out of getting my money back. He had me sign a document that said I wouldn't ask for my money back. I wouldn't do a chargeback, anything like that. And I was thinking I was in my first couple weeks of business. And so I just thought, well, I signed the document. It's my fault. It wasn't my fault. It was this person's fault for selling a junky product. So flash forward, 4 or 5 years later, I'm in a similar situation. This time it was someone that I trusted and I had known for a long time. And so I was willing to invest the money with this person. And for me, the $2,000 felt like a really good, like starting investment. But after a few months, I said, you know what? This really didn't work out. This really wasn't what you said it was. I think I'd like my money back. And he goes, oh, well, there's no refunds, which I thought was interesting because I'm a big fan of transparency. I'm lucky, knock on wood. I've never had to give a refund. And rather, no one's ever asked me for a refund either. But I'm very clear in my sales conversation of there's not refunds. It doesn't work that way. This is a transaction between us, and then it's going to lead to some other work that we're going to do together. But first things first, there's not a refund here. So I try to lead with that so that the customer can make an informed decision. And because it doesn't feel good to think you're buying something and realize, oh, it wasn't that, and now I'm out that money. So this guy says, oh, there's no refunds. Sorry, you can't have a refund. And I said, well, where did you? We didn't sign a contract. Where does it say there's no refunds? And he's like, oh, it's on my website somewhere that says no refunds, which I have no idea where it was. So I was like, okay. So I did a chargeback and got my money back. Pretty painless process, thankfully. So he comes back to me and he says, hey, I saw you did a chargeback, which I'm assuming wasn't happy about it. And he said, I'm just bummed that it got to this point. I'm bummed that we got here, us with our history, knowing each other, all this stuff. And I said, here's what I'll say. I don't like the way you do business. I don't like the way that you obfuscated some information and then came back and said it was almost sort of my fault for not knowing that there were no refunds, that this was like a one-time, investment or a no refund investment, what have you. And I said, and I don't know, I wouldn't say this was even a moral issue, but I was like, I don't do business that way. I don't like doing business that way. And I don't do business with people who do business that way. I think even that story is a little slimier than the situations that many of us would find ourselves in. I think a lot of times what we do is we tell the customer one thing and we do something a little bit different. And we say, oh, well, they wouldn't really know the difference. We do one thing and then we say, oh, well, I can squeak by here. Maybe you provide like a technical product for your customer, or you, let's say we've been on an SEO kick lately. Let's say you tell your customer you're doing some SEO work for them, but you didn't do anything for them that month. You did nothing and you invoice them anyway. No, they're not going to know any different. That's a little suspect. It's lying. It's not delivering on what you said you would do. And sometimes I think that we convince ourselves and we say, wow, it was a hard month. I was really busy. My kids were crazy. So if, and I think I'm talking out of a mentor that I had when I was younger, where there was always a good reason, I guess, for why I had made the decision I did. And I remember a conversation where he was like, Blake, stop telling me why you did what you did, because at the end of the day, it was still the wrong decision. Now, my worldview's probably grown a bit since then in that I do see a lot more gray. I see a lot more complexity. I understand, or rather pursue empathy. I try to, whenever there's a disagreement, I guess, on the way someone has done business, I try to give the benefit of the doubt and, hey, help me understand why you did that. Think about the employee I had who I unfortunately had to let go, and some of the work that she did that just wasn't up to par, and essentially being like, hey, help me, talk me through your process. It's not a moral issue. I didn't assume she was trying to cheat me out of anything. I realized that she had a process that was not doable. It wasn't productive for where I wanted to take my business. There's nothing moral or ethical about it. She had a different process than I would have preferred. Now, if I had been a better leader back then, I probably would have, I pretty much said, hey, build your process for how you want it to be, thinking, I'm being a great boss and being a flexible boss, when really I should have been like, hey, no, these are the things that need to happen. Now you can play within them, right? But she didn't make it wasn't a moral failure. And I think a lot of times we're not liars, cheaters, stealers for the most part. But I will say, when we talk about doing good business, and I've said this again and again and again, you will go farther in your business if you just do what you said you would do than you will being the one with the prettiest logo, the prettiest website, the snazziest marketing, the most established profile, the most long-running podcast. Those things are all nice, but they don't replace the integrity of your brand. They don't replace the reputation you build by just doing what you said you would do. I was terrified early on in my good advice days, and I was terrified of someone doing business with me and then not feeling like they got their money's worth. It caused me to go into sales very scared. It caused me to, I think, lose some credibility with my customers, because I was always, hey, are you happy? Is this good? Are you getting what you thought you were? And in some ways, I think it's understandable. I was new to the game. I really wanted to be honest and have integrity and do it the right way. But on the other hand, I think I lost credibility because I wasn't confident in simply doing what I said I would do. I wasn't confident in when I would have like a point of contention with the customer saying, hey, that's actually not what we agreed on. It's not what we said we were going to do. That's not what the contract says. And it wasn't obfuscated. It says it right here. So let's talk about it and see how we can resolve this going forward. That's something that I had to come into and navigate and get much better at. All that to say, I think the takeaway for today's episode: when you work and do business with your customers, say what you're going to do and don't fluff it up. Do what you said you're going to do. And if something, or rather when something goes wrong, because we always love to tell these success stories, but I think we do a disservice when we don't tell the stories of where we flubbed it and something went terribly wrong, which, by the way, no matter how savvy you are in business, those customers, they do happen. Whether it's something in your control or not, it just happens sometimes. But when things go wrong, don't point to a line item on a contract. Or rather, don't make that the heart and soul of the conversation. Maybe that's a starting point. Maybe a customer signed a 1-year agreement with you, and after 3 months, they want out. And you can point to the contract and say, well, hey, we talked this through, and we agreed this was the best strategy. And so you signed it here. So that's the start of the conversation. So, hey, how do we process this moving forward? Is there an avenue where you'd want to buy out a portion of that time and move on? Is there a way we can communicate that would resolve some pain you're having right now? But don't be the business that just says, well, you signed the contract, sorry. Which, going back to that digital marketer in the early days, that's basically what happened. I said, hey, I want my money back. He said, well, if you sign the contract, you can't. And that was the last conversation we had. And I thought, okay, it doesn't build raving fans, and it's not a great recipe for long-term business. Do what you said you would do. Be consistent. And be a little bit, I think a lot, but at least a little bit better than your competition. And you'll do well long term. Hey, that's today's good advice. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. I hope you're doing well today, and I wish you well. I hope you go make a lot of money with your business this week. All that to say, if you ever thought about supporting the podcast, you can always check out our Patreon, patreon.com/goodadvice for just $5 a month. Or if you're a business and you want to promote your business on the podcast, you can go and email me, Blake@goodadvicecoaching.com. We appreciate you. See you later. Peace.